Hi everybody, Adrian Fuentes here. Did you know that the Democrats of Greater Tucson has a website, TheDGT.org, and if you subscribe, it's only 20 bucks. You can support this great weekly communication where folks get together. Sometimes there's candidates, sometimes folks like me pop on to help understand what's going on in the world. The Democrats of Greater Tucson, TheDGT.org. Join up today.
Good afternoon and welcome to the best place to be on a Monday at noon, and that's the Democrats Greater Tucson presents Judge Kendrick Wilson for Pima County Justice of the Peace, Precinct 9. This is one of the county's most diverse precincts. Precinct 9 includes the University of Arizona, the city of South Tucson, and parts of the Tohono O'odham Nation. He is a native Tucsonan and a University of Arizona graduate. He is honored to serve the citizens of Precinct 9 and believes that everyone who comes to court deserves to be treated with fairness, respect, and dignity. Judge Wilson was appointed to the bench in 2019. He accepted the appointment when the Honorable Maria Felix, a longtime mentor and friend, retired. He was reelected in 2020. Judge Wilson has developed his entire legal career to keeping the citizens of Pima County safe and ensuring that the rights of victims and defendants are strictly protected. He worked for 9 years as a prosecutor and specialized in handling domestic violence and animal abuse cases. He worked for the Pasquayaqui tribe from 2015 until 2019 and worked from 2010 until 2015 in the Pima County Attorney's Office. He currently presides over Animal Welfare Court, which is the first of its kind in the nation, and Domestic Violence Court. These two important specialty courts focus on offender accountability and preventing recidivism. Let's give a warm welcome to Judge Wilson.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with all of you. Basically, as Joseph indicated, prior to taking the bench, I worked for over 10 years in criminal prosecution, primarily handling domestic violence, also animal abuse cases. I am a native Tucsonan, except for the 3 years that I attended Georgetown Law School. I came back to Tucson, and I'm definitely happy that I made that decision to do that. Beginning with my work at the Pima County Attorney's Office, some of you may realize that it was about 15 years ago that the Arizona legislature made non-fatal strangulation in domestic violence cases a felony. That's something where I obtained the first conviction in the state under that law of a woman who was strangled by her intimate partner, but did not die from it. For those of you that aren't familiar with that aspect of domestic violence, non-fatal strangulation is a very high lethality risk. Then I went on working with a senior prosecutor there. The legislature had also amended sexual assault laws in the state of Arizona. Previously, a sexual assault of one's spouse was considered a lesser felony. That sounds like something that currently our reproductive rights in Arizona were sent back to Civil War era, but that certainly sounds like a Civil War era law as well. I obtained the first conviction in the state of a spousal rape that was treated the same as any sexual assault. Then later, when I worked for the Pasquayaqui tribe, previously Indian reservations had become a safe haven for domestic abusers because tribes could not prosecute non-tribal members in their tribal courts. The Violence Against Women Act was then reauthorized in VAWA 2013, authorized prosecution of non-tribal members in domestic violence situations in tribal court. I obtained the first conviction in all of Indian country of a non-tribal member who had abused a tribal woman. And this really sent a message that the days where you're going to get away with it because you chose a tribal woman to abuse were over. Currently, I am proud to preside over Animal Welfare Court. And to give a little bit of background, when I worked at the Pima County Attorney's Office, I worked with Judge Maria Felix, who started Animal Welfare Court. there was no mechanism for dealing with animal abusers other than well-meaning judges that were ordering them to volunteer at the Humane Society. Well, for those of you that are familiar with the dynamic of animal abuse, first of all, it's an indicator of a high risk of future criminal behavior. Additionally, that's something where it's typically not a situation where someone just needs to see a cute, cuddly puppy in order to stop doing it. There's actually something more serious going on. And so what was happening is these well-meaning judges were doing that and actually creating a burden for the Humane Society. So what Judge Felix did is she invited some national experts to come and train our treatment providers here in Tucson on what's called the Anacare treatment modality. That was developed by the Animals in Society Institute and is to this day the only validated treatment modality to intervene and stop people from abusing animals. It's based on batterer's intervention treatment for intimate partner domestic violence. We currently have the only treatment provider in the state, that's Deborah Lowther Hayes at Perception Counseling, that's right here in Tucson. And we've actually had judges and attorneys from Phoenix that are very envious of us, because it's not very often that we can say we have something in Tucson that they don't have in Phoenix. But we are very pleased to have the Anacare treatment modality here and to use that for the serious animal abuse cases. Additionally, we know that while they are serious, many animal abuse cases are prosecuted as misdemeanors and not as felonies. So in creating this program, the first thing that we did was we brought in the entire community that deals with animal abuse. That's the Humane Society, Pima Animal Care, Game and Fish from the wildlife perspective, the treatment provider, and the defense bar as well, who plays a crucial role in what happens in animal welfare court. Right now, we have regular stakeholder meetings to make sure we're doing the best that we can for really everyone involved in those cases. This is still one of only a handful of these specialty courts in the country. I am very excited to say that there is a magistrate and city court, Judge Verena, who is trying to kickstart an animal welfare court there as well in Tucson City Court that is based on our model. We have seen very low recidivism. In fact, it was less than 8% the last time we estimated that using our statistics. That's incredibly low to be able to break the cycle of violence. And what we found with animal abusers is there really are three distinct categories of people. The first one are the ones that we're going to take the most seriously. Those are people that are intentionally being cruel. And those are the people that we're going to worry the most about, because they're also likely to commit violence against people. Then we have people where it's an issue of education, and they just don't know how to safely take care of animals. A particular case comes to mind that I presided over during the worst of COVID, so the entire thing took place on Zoom, but it was actually an adjunct professor at Pima College who was not from here, but was from the Pacific Northwest. Well, in Portland or Seattle, leaving a dog in a car isn't a big deal, but all of us in Tucson know that could result in the worst outcome possible of the dog dying from heat stroke. Luckily, some good Samaritans noticed and got a hold of Pima College police. Well, this wasn't an issue where this gentleman wanted to be cruel to his animal, but there was an element of education to make sure that that didn't happen. So that was a situation where, the 8-hour class at the Humane Society was adequate to deal with it. There's also a group of people that we see it in particular zip codes in particular, some of which are in my precinct, where people are using live animals for security. Well, the problem with that is, first of all, we end up having children getting mauled. And also, when PAC takes those animals into shelter, they often can't be rehabilitated and they end up being destroyed because they've been trained to be vicious. So what we have to do is work on breaking that value of using live animals for security and finding other methods of securing people's residences rather than using live animals, because then we get these animals that are not adoptable. And that's not the business that PAC wants to be in right now. We are very lucky here in Pima County that we have a low-kill municipal shelter. It's really not practical for a municipal shelter to be no-kill, because there are those animals that are suffering and not adoptable, that they simply have no other choice. But we went from being a shelter about 15 years ago that destroyed about 60% of the animals to where it's in single digits now, that more than 90% of the animals leave the shelter alive and with the hope of reaching a permanent placement. We also really try, and working with defense attorneys, working with our probation officer, working with our treatment provider to really get to the bottom of what's going on with people. A particularly sad case that happened was we had a woman who was accused of neglect for not feeding her pig. And this is not a sad story. To let everyone know, the pig is living his best life at Ironwood Pig Sanctuary now after several months of veterinarian-assisted weight gain. But it's not normal for someone to be in that position. Well, what we learned she actually disclosed to her probation officer and later disclosed to her treatment provider, she had undergone serious trauma. In fact, what that trauma was that her mother had passed away and had left her a very mean-spirited death note that said, "I'll be dead by the time you read this, and I just wanted you to know that I never wanted children and you ruined my life." Well, that sent her right over the edge. I really credit her probation officer and her treatment provider with enabling her to stay out of the state hospital, which, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the Arizona State Hospital is certainly better than nothing, but it's not a place that you want to be placed if you don't need to be in a hospital setting. And so we really got to the bottom, trying to figure out what's going on with the whole person in that situation. And that leads me to the other specialty court that I preside over, which is domestic violence court. This is a very important specialty court. We see these around the country, and we collaborate with Judge Wendy Million, who presides over City Court's domestic violence court. One of the things that I'm most proud of is in convincing the chief of the probation department from not pulling probation officers out of domestic violence court. I know they have short staffing over there, but as I mentioned to Chief Sanders, I cannot search houses for weapons if it's unsupervised probation. These are serious cases. Many of them have a high lethality risk, and it really is important that we take these cases seriously. One thing that a lot of people are surprised to hear is a fairly high number of felony acts are actually waived down to misdemeanors to be prosecuted as misdemeanors in domestic violence court. Now, there are reasons for that. I'm not trying to malign the county attorney for doing that, but that means these are serious acts, that they may be prosecuted and charged as misdemeanors, but it's not that they're not serious, and it's not that there are not survivors that are at risk. So one of the first things that Judge Million suggested that I do, which I'm very happy that I did, was to attend domestic violence orientation, which is where the offenders go. They have separate programming for men and women. This is where the men go. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting is the first thing that became clear to me is they asked all of these men who are accused of domestic violence if they had witnessed violence as children. And all of the hands went up. The other thing that happened is how many of them had been subjected to some sort of trauma as children, and 80% of the hands went up. So this is really intergenerational, and that's one of the things that's about breaking that cycle is you have to realize how this starts and how it continues. That's certainly something that I saw when I worked for the tribe. There's definitely an element of historical trauma that takes place with the domestic violence that occurs in the Pasquayaki Indian Reservation. It's happened for generations, and it's being modeled for children. Both male and female children see this, and it's normalized when they see it in the house growing up. So breaking that cycle is really crucial. The other thing that I also noticed is that one of the exercises was that a lot of these men had to participate twice during the session, or they had to take it again. And this was all afternoon on Friday, so they didn't want to have to take it a second time. But I noticed that one of the things they can do to participate is to read something if they don't want to reveal something about themselves. These adult men had about a third grade reading level. And that's also something that we have to consider as to, what employment opportunities are they really going to have if they have these barriers to success. One of the exercises that they did is they had them watch clips from a movie where Jennifer Lopez was being abused by her husband. And one of the first things they talked about is a lot of times what abusers will do in that situation is they will start trying to find reasons why they are different from that monster that they're looking at. Well, I didn't do that. I may have damaged some of her property, but I didn't attack her in that way. Trying to differentiate themselves in order to excuse their behavior. The other thing that they talked about, which for some of these men, they had never been confronted with this before, they talked about rape culture. And they talked about consent and what does it mean to consent. Well, they asked, after the scene where she had been beaten up severely, let's say that the husband had come back home, and because they're married, they had gone to sleep in the bed that they share, and they had had sex. Would it have been consensual? And then the question for these men was, yes, no, or I need more information. Well, 90% of them said, well, I would need to know if she said no. But then they were confronted with, by the facilitator, in what universe would she have had the ability to safely say no when she had just been beaten up? And then to get these men to admit that, maybe not by the definition of sexual assault, but had they ever used something other than voluntary consent in order to have sex with a woman, including, maybe had they used alcohol to get consent that they wouldn't have otherwise gotten. And you could tell that these were really earth-shattering concepts for these men. They hadn't thought about it before. And that's how you build change. And it's important. I think what was most important for me to attend that is I can have meaningful discussions with these defendants. And I know what the programming is that they've attended. I know where they should be in their curriculum and what they're actually trying to accomplish. It's not just a matter of, great, did you go to class? Okay, good, let's check off that box. It's let's have a meaningful conversation about what you're actually learning in class. And are you actually developing coping mechanisms so that you don't reoffend, you don't do this again, you don't escalate, even if maybe this time you got a pass because it was waived down to a misdemeanor, but you don't escalate to felony behavior, where then in many cases, it's really too late. So I can say that as a man who spent the vast majority of my career fighting violence against women, I'm extremely honored to have the endorsement of the Arizona chapter of the National Organization for Women. And I really appreciated that endorsement. They recognized the importance of a lot of the work that I've done and the work with survivors in this case. One of the things that I really learned at the tribe is you have to meet survivors where they're at. And having the knowledge of being able to do that, one of the things that we do as justices of the peace, the old adage is that, you become a justice of the peace because you want to do weddings. Well, that's a fun side thing that we do. That's not the most important work that we do. One of the things that I think is very important is orders of protection. And I actually facilitated a training for all of our judges that was put on by Judge Millian last week on orders of protection. And it is important to know that in Arizona, we have a firearms law where we can order that in an order of protection that someone surrender their firearms to the local sheriff. That's not something to be taken lightly. It is very serious. It is also very important for survivors. But the other thing that's important for us to know is that survivors don't always know what's the safest thing for them to do. Data indicates that leaving an abuser is often not the safest thing for a survivor to do. So when they're there in court, they're not lawyers, they're looking for help, and they need to know what services are available to them. I have very good contacts at Emerge. I have good contacts with the Victim Services Department at the Pima County Attorney's Office. I routinely tell survivors, I'm giving you what I have the power to give you, which is a piece of paper. It's not a bulletproof vest. This is not a substitute for safety planning. Now, you're the survivor. I'm not ordering you to do anything, but I do want to make sure you're aware of what's available to you and what is available to you at no cost to you. It's there for a reason. This is something that if you don't have concerns for your safety, I do, based on what you're telling me. And with the work that I've done, I know what the red flags are. If there are weapons in the house, if the defendant has recently lost employment, if the survivor has children that are not the defendant's children, if there's been non-fatal strangulation, if there have been threats to kill or descriptions of how they're going to kill if they ever leave. These are very serious things. Now, no one can predict what someone is going to do in the future, but it's really important to know that. And that also ties me in with the other thing that's important about what we do as justices of the peace. We handle misdemeanor cases, but those are still serious cases, and we still have important obligations to make sure that defendants' rights are protected. In fact, another endorsement that I'm very proud to have is by Joel Feynman, who's the former Pima County Public Defender, who until I took the bench, he had only ever known me as opposing counsel. And yet I know we had a lot of respect for each other. And I think that defense attorneys play a crucial role in my court. And one of the things that's really important to know is that, the Constitution still applies to misdemeanors. There are some pretty fine distinctions that make a difference in a criminal case. One of those issues, which I was able to raise with our Office of Court-Appointed Counsel, is a U.S. Supreme Court case called Bruton. Well, basically what Bruton says is if you have co-defendants whose best defense is to point the finger at each other, they can't have the same attorney. Well, we didn't have enough attorneys on our list for that to happen. And what some of you may not be aware of is cockfighting is against the law in the state of Arizona. Staging a cockfight is a felony. Attending a cockfight is a misdemeanor. Well, sure enough, the sheriff's department broke up a cockfight, which for those of you that haven't seen it, there are terrible pictures. It's a blood sport. But each of those defendants needed to have a different attorney, and making sure that the judge knew that from the beginning, that in order to protect their rights, they each had to have a different attorney who could evaluate their case, and perhaps their best defense was to point the finger at each other or to serve up the person who was staging the cockfight. That's very important that people are aware of that. One of the things that also comes up is in order of protection hearings. Defendants may not realize that they are making admissions, and they need to be advised of the fact that, yes, this is your opportunity. You have the right to be heard and to provide sworn testimony, but we are being recorded. And you may not realize that you're making admissions, and if you do so, this is a public record, and if there's a criminal case against you, it could be used against you in that situation. So we really have to play the role of gatekeeper in those situations, and it is really important. I can tell you that I have not been overturned on a criminal case since 2019. I'm proud of that record, although certainly I am happy to be appealed. That's how we review. That's how we make sure everyone's rights were upheld. Another case that comes to mind for me right now is a case where we had an individual where there was just a lot going on, and I didn't know why he was continuing to pick up shoplifting charges. Well, shoplifting in the state of Arizona, if you have a third or subsequent shoplifting in 60 months, it can be charged as a felony. And that certainly would have made this young man unemployable. But we really had an opportunity in this case to try to get to the bottom of what was going on. Ordinarily, for shoplifting, what the county attorney offers is unsupervised probation and essentially pay the restitution to Walmart. Well, I said, let's get him on probation where we can try to get to the bottom of what's going on. And sure enough, he disclosed to his probation officer, it's my day to test for drugs and I'm going to be positive for fentanyl. And I made clear to him that there would be no addiction shaming in this courtroom. That's not what we're here to do. This is not a weakness of character, but it is something that's serious because we've come to find out his mom actually attended court one time and admitted that she brought him back to life on Narcan a dozen times. Well, the question that I have is what's going to happen when mom's not there? If she's at the grocery store, what's going to happen when it's laced with something else? Because we know that the people that are selling fentanyl are not the most scrupulous people. How are we going to actually get him into rehab? That's what's important about trying to get to the bottom of what's going on with people. Yes, it takes more work, it takes more time, but it's important, and it's an important thing for the community. And that's really, I will be quite frank that domestic violence court is not the cheapest way to handle those cases by any means. It's the best way to handle those cases. The same thing with animal welfare court. And we've seen Pima Animal Care Center evolve over the years into a really innovative municipal shelter. The work that they do is good. During the pandemic, they were committed to trying to keep as many animals in their homes as possible. So if an animal was not suffering, was not dangerous, but there was just an issue of resources. And in some cases, it is a symptom of poverty, that we're not going to poverty shame people. Friends of PAC was working with people to pay for things like fencing, to pay for things like nutritious food, veterinary care. One of the things that we often refer people to is those of you that are familiar with the Pets Enrich Our Lives license plates in Arizona, that pays for what's called the Pet Fix program, which is now available to all zip codes in Pima County. For a $15 co-payment, anyone in Pima County can get a dog spayed or neutered, which of course, spay and neuter is a crucial tool that we have in reducing the number of unwanted animals. And they've actually had a very successful trap, neuter, return program for feral cats. Those of you that are familiar with downtown, about 15 years ago, Armory Park was literally flooded with feral cat colonies. Trap, neuter, return is a humane way to take care of that. It's not about euthanizing otherwise healthy animals. And they've lived out their lives to their natural lifespan, and now we don't have the same issue with feral cats in Armory Park. There are other neighborhoods that need more of that program, but that's been a very successful program and enabling the feral cat population to live out their lives when we're talking about cats that, for the most part, would not be adoptable. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done. It's a real collaboration. I cannot do it without the work of the deputy county attorneys that appear before me. And keeping in mind that many of them are recently out of law school, they don't always know the law. And it is important that the record is protected. You know, I can tell you that when I was a brand new attorney, luckily it wasn't on a most serious case. It was a leash law violation. I forgot to prove that the court had jurisdiction, and I never made that mistake again. So that's something that that is very important, and it's important that you know the right standards to apply. One thing that actually came before me just about 2 weeks ago was a case where there was a survivor who testified, whom I believe. And in the state of Arizona, those of you that are not familiar with the criminal laws in the state of Arizona, Arizona is one of the most permissive states when it comes to self-defense. Now, in this group, not everyone here may agree with that, but that is the law in the state of Arizona. You do not have a duty to retreat. You're allowed to essentially stand your ground. Again, not everyone here agrees with that. I don't think I would have voted for it, but it is the law in the state of Arizona. In California, for example, if the defendant was asserting that he was justified and acting in self-defense, he would have to prove, not beyond a reasonable doubt, but would have to prove by a lower standard that he was justified. Well, in the state of Arizona, the government must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant was not justified, which proving the negative is harder. But it was important that that record be clear as to what I had considered and what standard I had applied. And if it had not been correct, then it would be overturned in less than 30 days. For example, I considered the fact that the defendant testified that he was scared out of his mind that the victim was going to shoot him, yet he was unarmed and he approached the victim. He didn't take cover. I made it clear not because he has a duty to under Arizona law, but because that shows the logic of his actions if he was in fact that fearful that he would unarmed approach someone. Additionally, I found that although it is a very permissive standard, an honest belief is not enough under Arizona law. It has to be a reasonable person. And so in looking at would a reasonable person have believed that there was in fact an immediate threat to his safety that would have necessitated him hitting her on the head, which I found that did not exist, and that he had, in fact, once he had secured the firearm, which they both testified she never pointed at him, that there was no longer a danger. The danger had ended. So it is important to have people who are familiar with the law. Right now, I am one of only 3 lawyers on the Justice Court bench, and I'm very proud to work with 2 of the new judges. Judge Victoria Steele and Judge Crystal Foster are very hard workers who are often come to me with questions because they want to get it right. And that's why it's important that we do have people who are familiar with the law, that have practiced this, that know what the correct standard is so that we can get things right, because you should have the same rights in justice court that you would in city court. And with that, I see that we have a question in the chat.
Paul Stapleton Smith asks, Judge Wilson, with your perspective that animal abusers are often serial abusers that create cycles of increasing abuse, would you please explain the notorious Sadie the Collared Bobcat shooting in a residential neighborhood? Was the shooter convicted but allowed to keep his guns during probation? If memory serves, he was a retired policeman. Thank you for your time with us today.
Yes, and to give the information, what happened with this Bobcat case, and I will give some background on that case. What the testimony that came out that was from game and fish officers, that they had determined, and he had actually confessed to Game and Fish, that he was concerned about his pet chihuahuas, of which he had 3. Additionally to that, he had tried to scare away the bobcat out of his yard, and that he then shot the bobcat, which is unlawful under Arizona law. Interestingly enough, and this was an issue where the standard of proof is important, had this been a person who was committing a criminal trespass under Arizona law, he would have been justified and it would have been impossible to get a conviction. However, for wildlife, and presumably there is a perspective that wildlife would have less understanding of private property and that you shouldn't climb over walls, it does not automatically impose justification. Under Arizona law, a conviction under Title 17, which is the Game and Fish Code, does not make someone a prohibited possessor of firearms or live ammunition. There would be no mechanism under that statute to make someone a prohibited possessor. So seizing the firearm, he could have walked to a gun store and bought a new one legally instantaneously. What I had to consider in that case was this an act of intentional cruelty or an act of education? What I found was that what I could do that would be the most rehabilitative was I contacted the University of Arizona Department of Wildlife and Natural Resources and found they had a college-level course on urban wildlife. Frankly, I could have put him in jail, which would probably have removed him from society for a few days. And that's realistically what I could have done in that case. What I opted to do was to see if, and I can't make him learn something from that class, but I got permission from the professor. He is in the process of auditing that course. I was also concerned that if I sent him to volunteer at Pima Animal Care, he would come back with 12 more Chihuahuas, which wasn't the goal either. So, definitely I found that he was guilty in that case. I found that it was wrong for him to shoot the bobcat. In fact, I actually gave him the maximum fine allowable under the statute, which goes to the Wildlife Theft Prevention Fund. Ultimately, I decided to try to do something rehabilitative, which is what I think we're here to do in all of those cases. If it was something where I thought there was a problem with lack of empathy, I would have ordered him to the Anacare program. My concern was based on including what the game and fish officers were telling me. As far as he was concerned, his Chihuahuas were his kids, and that might have actually done more harm than good. So that is why there was that ruling on that case. And I will find out come May what he's taken from that college course. It may be something where I'm certainly not infallible. I could have gotten it wrong. I will find out, and I'll see if that's something where we were able to have some sort of a positive outcome.
Are there any minimal requirements for somebody to be a justice, to have your job? Because I was very concerned about somebody who ran unopposed and got elected that I thought was the worst possible person to have your job. And are there any requirements, or should there be some minimum requirements?
Well, I will say the minimum requirements are you have to be a registered voter, you have to be over 18, and not convicted of a felony. Those are the requirements. As far as whether there should be requirements, I'm not in the state legislature. It's not really for me to say, but I will say that to be a magistrate in Tucson City Court, which handles the same kind of cases that we do, they handle cities misdemeanors, you have to be a lawyer in good standing. And, as I said, I've got two colleagues who were not law trained who work very hard. I'm very proud to work with them, and I'm proud. There's no shame in asking questions if you don't know the answer. There is no shame in that. I think without my experience as a lawyer and having done this work, I would find it harder to make the decisions. I would find it harder to get it right. One of the things that comes up, and that people will sometimes, lawyers will object when, for example, a witness's memory is going to be refreshed. Well, they used to teach assistant U.S. attorneys, you can refresh with a bowl of fettuccine Alfredo if it will help. It doesn't have to be something that witness wrote or did before trial. For example, a civilian witness could look at a police report and say, oh yeah, now I remember I said that to the police officer. Well, if you don't know that, that's something that I can rule on instantly in court because I'm confident that it's correct and that it's not going to be overturned on appeal. And I think that is important. And ultimately, wherever you end up, your constitutional rights are still the same and are still absolutely important. And frankly, we also hear telephonic search warrants. We are that last check on law enforcement before they can search your home. And we are that last check, and it's also important to make the correct findings. For example, I had a request for a search warrant from a pretty rookie officer who wanted a phone. And I had to clarify, okay, are you asking for the phone or the contents of the phone? Because it's not the same thing. And if you want the contents, I need to have probable cause that there's something in there that's actually going to be evidence of a crime, and not just that you want to see who they were talking to. So it is very important that we know that.
Okay. Sounds to me like we ought to be talking to our state legislators then, because your experience and knowledge is invaluable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's the reason I like to do this work. And that's the other part of it. We have the baby attorneys because that makes sense. Brand new attorneys are going to take misdemeanors because you're not going to dive into felonies when you're a brand new attorney, be it criminal defense or prosecution. And so they may not always know, not because they mean badly, but because they're brand new.
So I kind of consider this to be an interview for a job. So I'm going to ask you a question. Of all of your outstanding accomplishments, which are many, many, which one are you the most proud of and why?
I would say my accomplishment on the bench is convincing Chief Sanders to keep probation officers in domestic violence court, because that's literally a matter of life and death for survivors. I would say in my career before this, it's getting the first conviction under the Violence Against Women Act, because that was about undoing hundreds of years of wrong to tribes. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the U.S. Supreme Court case law that applies to tribes, but there was a case in the 1800s called Crow Dog, where one of the Plains tribes in the Dakotas, there was a murder that took place. Crow Dog killed Spotted Tail. Nobody in the community liked Spotted Tail, and the judge in the tribal court found that Crow Dog had actually done the community a favor, but Spotted Tail had a family. So the sentence was, you have to care for his family and make sure they're provided for. The U.S. Supreme Court in the 1800s, although I'm not sure that the current U.S. Supreme Court would necessarily find much differently, said, oh, this is terrible. Tribes don't understand due process. They can't do this. We're taking this away from tribes, that this kind of a sentence in a murder case is never okay. And it wasn't until the 1970s under Oliphant, they said, well, maybe we'll let them prosecute their own tribal members, but we're not letting them prosecute non-tribal members. And the Violence Against Women Act opened that up. And this was big for all of Indian country, for an entire group of people to be able to say that this tribe can protect its own women. And that's just pretty huge right there.
Thank you.
Okay. Mike.
I'm just wondering, given your privileged perspective on the Pima County's justice system, where you feel we have inadequate resources or inadequate funding, and where we could do better and better spend our money.
Well, let me start off by saying I have a tremendous amount of respect for Jan Lesher and a lot of the budget she inherited. So this is not something that I know there's a lot of areas where the Board of Supervisors and the county administrator would like to put more resources, and they're just not there, especially now that the federal COVID money is drying up. I would say that the adult probation department is an area where they are understaffed. That's concerning to me. I would say that what's also concerning to me is that all areas where there are lawyers are understaffed, and that's the public defender, the county attorney, public defense services. And that's frankly because with the Great Resignation, lawyers can go elsewhere and make more money. They don't do that kind of work to get rich. Hopefully they get some reward out of it, but that definitely needs more resources. The other thing that I would say is a big gap is we do not have the resources in the community for adequate mental health care and drug treatment. And unfortunately, I don't see us getting to where it's going to be adequate. We're going to have to work with the system that we have. And luckily, Perception Counseling, which is our provider for Anacare, has been able to get payment through Access. But as you're aware, Access is underfunded right now, and that's going to be a big problem in the state budget. I know the governor has mentioned that there's a big mandate for more money for our Medicaid program. But I think those are some of the areas that are underfunded. And frankly, I think that one of the things that tends to happen when there's a staffing shortage with law enforcement, which we know that there is right now, is some of the preventative things that they do go by the wayside. And that's really unfortunate because we need the mental health team. We certainly see the benefits of that. And frankly, right now, we've got an excellent detective with the sheriff's department who does the animal abuse cases, but it's because he's got an interest in it. So it's like, okay, it shouldn't just be, okay, whoever's got an interest in it. No, these are serious cases. If he retires, we're still going to have a detective assigned to it.
Okay, Lillian, you have your second question.
I have a neighbor who has a dog that's supposed to be a service dog. She actually has 2 dogs. And I know for a dog to be a service dog, they actually have to go through some training and get certified. But there doesn't appear to be any training for owners. She locks her dogs, both of them, on the balcony in the middle of the day and leaves. She sometimes puts them in a cage on the balcony and locks 2 dogs in the cage with no sign of any water whatsoever. Is there any training people who have service dogs are supposed to go through?
You know, my familiarity with that is a friend of mine who has a CNI service dog, and she voluntarily went through training, but it wasn't something that she was mandated to do. She did that because she wanted to do things right. One thing that I would sort of to let you know, in particular, if there's no water, Pima Animal Care is taking a more I would say, collaborative approach rather than punitive approach right now. And that's something that we learned through our stakeholder meetings, which is why the number of citations have gone down. The animal protection officers try, at least, unless the animal is severely in some sort of danger or suffering, they'll try twice to work with people before they issue a citation. So if you are observing that, I understand it's never pleasant to report on your neighbor. So I understand if there's hesitancy in doing that, but know that it's not that they're going to come guns blazing wanting to arrest her. It's that they want to try to engage in some education so that she doesn't get before me in court. And if there is a situation of no water in the summertime, that is serious. Dogs can have a heat stroke and it can result in death. I used to, when I used to prosecute those cases at the Pima County Attorney's Office, it was not pleasant reading necropsy reports about dogs that died of dehydration, but it does happen. And so just the one thing I would throw out there is that Pima Animal Care will come out and try to work with people and make sure that they can inform them of what the laws are before they take a punitive approach.
Is the thing about service animals a federal thing or a state thing? Because it seems to me the law should say if you have a service animal, you should have some minimal training on how to take care of the animal. You know, not anything fancy, but just they got to have food and water. You got to take them out to walk.
Absolutely. And well, there's 2 different things. There's service animal and emotional support animal, which are 2 different things, and they have 2 different definitions under the law. I certainly agree that there ought to be more training, but when it comes down to, and I see there was a comment in the from Lee Oler that legally the animal has to have water and shade available at all times, and that is true. That whether it's in the city or the county, that's in both the city code and the county code. That applies to people who have any animal, whether it's a service animal or not. And that also applies whether they're aware of it or not. That's going back to the gentleman who was the adjunct professor at Pima College. He wasn't aware that it's illegal to leave a dog in a car, and he wasn't aware of the consequences of having a dog in a hot car in Tucson by virtue of not being from here. That was something where, you know, not to be flip at all, but one thing that he did was throughout the trial, we were on Zoom, he had the dog sitting next to him on the couch to show me how much he loved her. And I said, that's not why we're here. You're not accused of not loving your animal, but you need to learn that keeping the dog in the car is not going to work in Tucson.
So who sets the law about service animals?
Arizona does have some state laws on service animals. The Americans with Disabilities Act has to do with whether an establishment allows you to bring a service animal into an establishment. Like you might see some restaurants will say service animals only. That's under the Americans with Disabilities Act. But that is something that would be regulated on a statewide level. that I have a feeling probably is not the biggest fire right now for the state legislators, although they should be aware.
Right.
I got to follow up on the animal abuse issue. You during your statements, your opening statements, you mentioned that there was evidence that abuse of an animal was a precursor to other crimes and more serious crimes against humans. Can you say more about that evidence, first of all? And you also noted that there was now an 8% recidivism rate amongst people who had gone through your program. And I'm wondering if that differs at all from a prior rate and whether or not that had been measured, whether there was an appreciable decline in that recidivism rate.
Well, I'll start with the recidivism question. Starting with that, I would say in domestic violence courts, if you can keep recidivism below 50%, we consider that a success. So 8% is extremely low when we're talking about animal abuse. And I think it's because we have a very innovative probation officer and treatment provider. With regard to the link between abuse of animals and abuse of people, if it is intentional, now again, this doesn't apply to people where it might be a symptom of poverty, it might be an educational issue. The link that is shown is that animal abusers have a lack of empathy. And that's a real concerning situation if they don't have that. Jeffrey Dahmer is the greatest example of an animal abuser who went on to become a serial killer. Now, that's not to say that, I don't look at people who appear before me and say that you're going to become a serial killer. But certainly it is important that we recognize that link. Another well-demonstrated link is between people who abuse animals and commit domestic violence, in particular when people use a companion animal to exercise power and control over their intimate partner. We've definitely seen that in cases. In fact, interestingly enough, surveys of domestic violence survivors have shown the number one reason why a survivor chooses not to leave an abusive situation is because they don't have the ability to bring their animal with them. That is the number one reason why survivors choose not to leave. And so that's something, and if you think about it too, they'll say, they're going to harm or kill the dog if you leave or if you don't comply with me. That's a tool for exercising power and control. Another thing that has been documented, sociologists who have studied child molesters in prison, when they've interviewed them, a large majority of them confessed to experimenting with bestiality before they moved on to children. That's a real red flag for sexual deviancy.
Indeed. One follow-up on that. You had three categories of animal abusers: those who intentionally inflict cruelty, those who are just lacking education, and people who use animals for security. I'm wondering about whether there might be a fourth category that you could speak to, and that's mental health, especially around hoarding.
And hoarding is different. And one of the things we learned early on about hoarding is if you send a hoarder to Anacare, you can actually do a lot of harm because it's not a lack of empathy with hoarders for the most part. If they present, it's often that they have too much empathy and they think they're helping and it gets out of control too quickly. With hoarders, there may be intense loneliness, there may be just general mental health issues. We have had hoarding cases, and I will say that our probation officer he's got patience that I certainly don't have for these situations. And when you're talking about a hoarder, you can't tell an alcoholic, oh, well, you can just have one glass of wine. It's not going to work. A hoarder just can't have animals. And oftentimes they don't spay and neuter their animals and they start multiplying. And that's a situation where, and our probation officer, Ricardo Chavez, what he will do is it's actually this detailed of going through a plan with the hoarder. Okay, this week you need to clean out the back bedroom. I'm going to inspect next week. Then we're going to move on to the back bathroom. Then we're going to move on to this part of your yard. And believe me, he is those people's neighbor's favorite human on the face of the earth. But it is a separate category. Those people do need mental health treatment, but we do not put them in the Anacare program.
Okay, Susie Anderson has a question.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Are there any other states or cities who have mental health or collaborative services you would like to see here? And are other communities adopting your policies?
Well, I will say that we've gotten attention really from all over the world for animal welfare court. as well as for DV court. In fact, Judge Million in city court she has been training judges and attorneys all over the country in building domestic violence courts. So those are really being modeled. I will say that in particular, what's going on in city court right now for DV court is something that we want to springboard off of and not reinvent the wheel. Judge Million has a federal grant right now for a firearms project. That one thing that all of you are going to shudder when you hear this, because it is disturbing. When I order someone to surrender their firearms, whether that is a condition of probation, a condition of release, or a condition of an order of protection, it's on the honor system. We assume that they are going to do what I tell them to, that my black robe is going to scare them enough that they're going to go to the sheriff and turn in their firearm. Well, what Judge Million has is this federal grant that's actually going to do follow-up on that, where when the order of protection is served, the law enforcement officer or the constable will say, can we do this the easy way and you just give me your firearm now? If there will be people that follow up with the survivor and say, do you know if that offender still has firearms? Because as far as I'm concerned, a statement from a survivor saying, I have actual knowledge that he still has firearms after the date that he was ordered to surrender them, I think that would rise to the level of probable cause so that there is follow-up happening. Now, the probation department does search houses for firearms, which is why we need them. But being able to springboard off of Judge Million's program, that she's dragging TPD through that kicking and screaming, and we're going to make sure that we get the sheriff's department on board, as well as the UAPD has also agreed to be a part of that. So those are things that I would definitely like to emulate. Another thing that I think is worth emulating is San Diego has the Family Justice Center, which is an award-winning program. It's a one-stop shop for victims. That's something that may not be the most urgent need for survivors in Tucson right now, but I think that's something that definitely needs to be on the horizon. That's a place where survivors can get all sorts of services where, for example, rather than sitting in a police interrogation room, they have a room that's set up like a living room where they can speak with a detective and give their statement. And they have a place where their children can be overseen by people that are childcare while they're giving a statement. That's something I'd like to see emulated here.
Okay, Mike, you have a question.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I think this community really owes a big debt of gratitude to Wendy Million. She has been very innovative and very effective with her domestic violence court implementation. I was wondering if you have other endorsements that you'd like to tout at this point. You mentioned two, former Public County Defender Joel Feinman and National Organization of Women. Are there others who have endorsed you that you'd like to highlight?
Absolutely. Thank you. I have the support of the chair of the Board of Supervisors, Adelita Grijalva, who I've been working with since I was in college. I have the support of Andres Caño, who is the former minority leader of the Arizona House of Representatives, and a longtime friend and mentor, Maria Felix, who we still drag out of retirement to come to stakeholder meetings for Animal Welfare Court because she was in that from the very beginning. So I'm really happy to have the support of all those people and hope to get more.
Okay, and Lillian Fox has a question.
I didn't realize there were emotional service. This dog is probably an emotional support dog. Are the laws any different? Do they have?
So for emotional support animals, it's typically the dog doesn't have to undergo the same kind of training. But as far as the requirements under the Pima County Code and the City Code of having access to water and shelter, there is no difference there. That applies to all animals across the board.
Thank you.
Okay, and Susie has her hand up.
Yeah, Your Honor, the Sunday paper, The Star, had a wonderful series on abuse and death caused by police officers, usually tribal police on the reservation, and that was up in the Dakotas. And is there the same kind of problem on the Tohono O'odham reservation?
So I'm less familiar with Tohono O'odham since I worked for Pasquayaki, and I will say that at the Pasquayaqui tribe, when we would go to national conferences with people from other tribes, they thought that we were leaps and bounds ahead of them. And so Pasquayaqui has made a real point of investing in their justice system and in their police department. They are lucky that they have the Casino del Sol. It is a revenue generator, which they have committed to putting that into public works. I'm not as familiar with Tana Atam. I know that they are looking at implementing the Violence Against Women Act. They have not quite done it yet, but they are definitely looking at emulating a lot of the work that Pasquayaqui has done. And it is important to remember the historical trauma. Some of the reservations in the Dakotas don't even have their own police department. They rely on the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And sometimes response times are, instead of a matter of minutes, it's actually days. So we really have to remember that this historical trauma is really going on in Native communities. But Pasquayaqui is very lucky to have the resources that they do. Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here with everyone. I certainly want to continue the work that I'm doing here in Justice Court. I would encourage all of you to take a look at my website. That's www.votewilson4jp9.com and check out. That shows the precinct area, which includes Jefferson Park neighborhood by UMC, all the way over through West University, all the way south through Armory Park and Barrio Viejo through South Tucson to Sanavir. So it's a very diverse precinct. There's a lot of people in that precinct, and I want to continue this work. It's important, and I think that the survivors are counting on us to make sure that we do this work, and also the accused are counting on us that when they appear in justice court, to know that their rights are going to be preserved. A friend of mine who is a public defender, who is now a private attorney, she actually had someone question her when she was out helping me collect signatures and said, why would you go collect signatures for a judge that you admittedly have lost cases in front of, and who before becoming a judge was a prosecutor when you're a public defender? And she said, because I know in that courtroom, if I lose, it's because I should lose. And I know that my client's rights were protected. And that was about the best endorsement I think I could get. So thank you.
Hey everybody, it's Senator Mark Kelly. As all of you know, Arizona Democrats have had a lot of important wins over the last few years. We won 2 U.S. Senate races, and we delivered Arizona's electoral votes to President Biden and Vice President Harris. We elected Governor Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, and Attorney General Chris Mays. Now, those elections were close, and our victories mattered. Arizona Democrats from the federal to the local level have delivered real results for our state on critical issues like combating climate change, lowering prescription drug costs, protecting the right to vote, and preventing more restrictions on abortion access. The Democrats of Greater Tucson offers the opportunity to hear from elected officials and candidates about that important work and the issues that matter to them. That information will be invaluable as Arizonans head to the polls. So this election cycle, whether you're signing up to knock doors, make phone calls, or joining the Democrats of Greater Tucson to hear from and speak to Democrats in our area, please know that your voice matters, and we need you on this team. Thank you.